Now, hello everyone. Jose J. Garcia with Mobile Home University here. Very special guest and honor to have on here. Um, Now, this individual has been investing in mobile home parks for almost 3 decades. So, think you know something about mobile homes, right? Frank Rolfe. Yes, sir. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us. Absolutely. So like I mentioned, you've been doing this almost 3 decades at this time, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, long time. Tell me, let's jump
Yep.
right in it. So, in the 3 decades that you've been in, how has the market changed in mobile homes, mobile home parks?
Well, it's changed a lot. Back when I got in the 90s, everyone was terrified of the asset class.
Hmm.
Everyone thought it was a big old joke. Banks wouldn't make loans on them. You were embarrassed to say you owned a mobile home or a mobile home park.
Okay.
Since that time, like Rodney Dangerfield, we got no respect. Now we're getting respect. We can get the same loans as big office buildings. Wall Street loves mobile home parks. Most smart people love them. So it's changed dramatically. The product hasn't changed. It's the perception that's changed.
Sure. And now, of course, you have people like yourself and even Warren Buffett who are investing. I mean, that tells you something.
Well, you have not only Warren Buffett, you also have Sam Zell is the largest owner of parks. Buffett's the largest owner of manufacturing and finance. So you have the two titans of real estate in the same sector. So in fact, the only sector that has both titans in the same spot.
Interesting. So now, big names like that, massive, of course, are they building more parks at this time or allowing to build additional?
No, the problem is you can't build them anymore because cities don't want them, and they don't want them because they lose a ton of money with them.
Wow.
So and then you're gonna say, how do they lose money with them? Let me give you an example. We owned a park. We've sold it. We had a park up in Arnold, Missouri, and it's right across from the high school and the middle school. So there's a crosswalk from the park directly onto the school campus. So the kids who live in the park, they literally just walk across the street with a crossing guard twice a day, and that gets them to school and back. So a lot of parents want to live in that park if they're looking for affordable housing because the kids can literally walk to school. You don't have to worry about picking them up or nothing.
Sure.
So that park, every single home in that park has got at least one kid in school. And our total property tax per lot on that park, the lots are worth about 50 grand or so. So that's about $500 a year. The homes are about $5,000, so another 50. So the city gets 550 a year per lot, but that tuition costs them $8,000 per lot. So if you add up every kid in school, that park loses $1 million a year for the city.
Wow.
So therefore, the city, the last thing they would ever want is another park because that park is costing them a fortune. And that's the problem. So cities across America, they don't want the parks because they don't want to pay for it. But they can't do that because under the duty to serve laws, they have to treat the poor and the rich identically. So what they do is they rabble rouse all the nearby neighbors every time someone wants to build a new one to come out and speak against it so they can vote it down and say, we love mobile home parks, we love affordable housing, but we represent the people and the people have spoken, they don't want it. It's the greatest setup in history. And that's how it works. So that's why there haven't been, nor will there ever really be any more of any substance.
Interesting. That's something new. Like I said, for those of you listening, this is the gentleman to learn from. Absolutely. So that being said, nobody's building anymore. I guess at this point, everything has to happen through a sale. You get a park, you invest in it, you grow it, whatever you need to do, and then you sell it. What is a typical time you would keep a mobile home park?
Typically, historically, we've held parks from anywhere from 5 to 7 years, but every park is different.
Mhm.
Warren Buffett once said, anytime you don't sell something, if there's an offer, you bought it back at that same price. So whenever you get a price more than you would pay for it yourself at that moment, you should sell it. And sometimes you get that offer in 6 months, and sometimes you get it in a decade or maybe longer. But the key is you want to stay fluid. You want to not be emotionally involved with any property or say, yeah, I'm keeping that forever.
Okay, 5 to 7 years. Okay, I was thinking maybe longer, but okay. And that's, I guess, the
Well,
time
you
come.
can go longer. I know people who have owned parks for generations, but I'm just
Okay,
saying that even those people, it's always smart to always be looking at offers and to be fluid, because the last thing you'd want to do is have this great offer and pass it up just because you don't want to listen to any offers.
right. Okay. What's one of the worst parks you've ever picked up?
Worst parks I ever picked up were all in the same state, all in Louisiana. The problem in Louisiana is you're fighting a real uphill battle. At least you were back when I had them, which was back in the 90s. You had everything bad at one time. You had really low lot rents. You had apartments that were not owned by big companies, but little moms and pops. And those rents would drop so much when they had a vacancy. It was unbelievable. If they had a few vacant lots, they'd panic, or units. They put up giant banners, like, 2-bedroom from $300 when it was $700 before. So all the
Wow.
time, the banners went out. Anyone you had in your park who was kind of marginal, they just jump over to the apartment and abandon their mobile home.
Huh.
And collections are really, really hard in Louisiana back then because they didn't have courts. The judges worked out of their homes. At least they did where I was. And so that meant evictions were really, really hard. They could only do a few of them a day. And so everything all added together, Louisiana drove me nuts. Now, this is before Katrina. Louisiana has probably changed a whole lot since then. But all of my bad parks, my headache parks, the parks that scared me to death, they were all in Louisiana.
Interesting. I have an investor friend out there in Louisiana. I might have to run some of these questions by him and see. I think it might have changed at this point. I know he does rather well in that area, but wow, that's interesting. Okay.
Well, if you're a Lonnie dealer, that's the kind of market you want, right? Because your spread is between the lot rent and the home rent. So
Sure.
you want really low lot rents. Problem is, as a park owner, you want really high lot rents. And if the
Got
market
it.
won't support it, you're stuck.
Makes sense. Understood. Okay. What is your thoughts in the stigma that mobile homes carry? And you mentioned this in the beginning, but I think it's still very much there. I don't think a lot of people brag necessarily, I own mobile homes, but the
Yeah.
stigma itself.
Well, see, we're all over America. We're in 25 states approximately.
Mhm.
And the stigma goes away the farther north you go.
Okay.
So when you're down in the southern states, people refer to occupants of parks sometimes as trailer trash.
Mhm.
When you get north of that, by the time you get to about Missouri, trailer trash, that whole word goes away. And then as you go about one state north of Missouri, they don't even use the word trailer anymore. So if someone lives in a mobile home park in Minnesota, they don't even call it a mobile home park. They just say that it might have, someone say, where do you live? Oh yeah, my address is such and such. And they don't even think twice about it. It's
Huh.
a kind of a cultural, more Southern styled thing. And I think the media is what's created a lot of that, to be honest with you.
Mm.
So they invented that label, and they've stuck with it. But in the more northern states, you have a lot more seniors in the properties. A lot more people have family members who live in mobile home parks. So they don't even call them mobile home parks. They don't call them mobile homes. They just consider it a house. So it's not universal across America.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I mean, down here we definitely have the whole, if you want drugs, go get them. Just the whole, every bad name I guess you can think of, which is not the case. I mean, some of these
Right.
community parks are very, very nice. I mean, almost
Correct.
residential like. So, and they
That's
get
right.
rated, of course, but definitely the stigma is very strong in this area where I'm at, which I'm east of Atlanta, by the way, about 45
Sure.
minutes. This is the majority
Yeah.
of what we do.
Yep.
Now, I'm sure you have plenty. I've heard many stories that you told about your residents and the kind of homemade fixtures, and
Yep.
everybody's a plumber, everybody's an electrician at a mobile home park. How
Yep.
often did you see people trying to do their own fixtures, trying to create their own solution for whatever's broken?
Well, back when I started out, I self-managed my early parks. So I saw it all back then. People would basically just cobble things together using electrical tape and plastic, and it didn't work. And even some of the park owners were doing that on their own repairs. I saw people who were repairing main water leaks in their lines by digging down and then wrapping the pipe with tire rubber and then
Wow.
running wire over that like 1,000 times. So when they turned the water back on, it would still be shooting at both ends of the rubber. And they thought that was a solution. It was the problem is that, we call it the ballad of the pro and the schmo. If you use the pro, it's more expensive, but it's a one-time fix. And if you use the schmo, the problem is you have to fix it like 40 times. And when you add it together, you could have just done it once and done it right and used a professional. That's the problem with a lot of these parks and people is they don't see the big picture, which is you got to add up all those repeated fixes. And you normally end up, I mean, if you do your own plumbing, for example, and you're paying your own water bill on your mobile home and you don't know how to fix it, the cost of that water is going to exceed anything the plumber would have cost.
Oh yeah.
But they don't think it that way. So they're always cobbling stuff without any expertise.
I think it's that mentality of get by. we'll get by, and it just
That's what
continue.
they
But
do. They don't think of the
absolutely,
big picture. That's correct.
very good point. Yeah, if you fix it right the first time, you probably save yourself a whole lot of ton of headaches, money, and etc. But yeah, it's the way of seeing it.
Yeah, you know, in parks sometimes you see people who have what we call disposable cars. They'll buy these cars for like $300 or $400, and then you know it doesn't even run, and after 2 weeks it dies, right? And if you look at how many of these disposable cars they buy and how many of these cars they have to do kind of makeshift engine work and tire replacement, you could go out and buy a brand new car and
Yeah,
you'd be money ahead and you'd be more stylish and not have to worry about it. I really think a lot of it follows back to just really bad economic training on how money works, to be honest with you.
absolutely. I would agree 100% on that. I mentioned I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, east of. Have you ever done business in Georgia?
No, see, our territory is what we call the Great Plains in the Midwest. So we're
Okay,
Texas to Canada, and then we're that collection of states from about the middle of America up. And you're southeast, which is not where we are. Now we have some stuff in the southeast. We have some parks in Charleston, South Carolina. We
okay.
have a park in Homosassa, Florida. But that's about as southeast as we get. We don't have anything in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. That's not our turf.
Okay. So how does the market differ from state to state, even the ones you are located in?
Well, first you have the red and the blue states. The red states are a lot easier as far as the laws. Being a landlord, evictions are simpler, and your grandfather's rights are better, and there's no risk of rent control. So that's the first big breakout between the states is, you know, is it a red state or a blue state, which mainly means is it landlord friendly or is it not? Then you have the geographic portion because some areas of America people are moving into, some they're moving out of. But we found really the big part isn't the state, it's the metro market you're in. I'd much rather be in a really strong metro market in Georgia than be in a really lousy metro market in Arizona or some other what's considered to be hot state. So people always think, yeah, you know, this is a hot state. There's no hot state. It's the metro markets that are hot or not.
Hmm. Okay. What are some reasons that parks fail to profit?
You know, the main reason parks fail is that people, when they buy them, they don't recognize it's not really an investment grade property. So they basically buy into their own failure. So they don't do good due diligence on it. They don't really scope out the market. They don't run a test ad. They really don't know what they're doing. They just buy it because they figure, it's a mobile home park. It's kind of cheap. And let's buy one and just expect the customers to be stupid because they watch too much television. And next thing you know, they can't make anything work because anyone could have told them on the front end it would never work. And so that's how it works. If you do good due diligence, like I don't know anyone who ever calls me that has a park doing poorly that did good due diligence on it. All the people who call me up and say I'm failing with my park, and I start asking them just the most basic questions. They have no idea. I ask them just
Wow.
like, what are the apartments rent for? I don't know. How big is your market? I don't know. How many
Oh,
calls
wow.
did you get on your test ad? I don't know. I've had people even call me up with failing sewer systems. They didn't even know what a sewer system was. I had a guy call me once on a packaging plant. He thought he was on city sewer. Had a lady call me on septic. She thought she was on city sewer. I mean, if you don't do due diligence like that, how can you possibly succeed? It's a 1 in a million shot.
Wow. You don't plan, you plan to fail. Absolutely. That's huge there. Okay. So lack of due diligence. I mean, you're failing.
Yep.
How strict are city officials with parks in some of these states that you invest in?
Well, the problem city officials have is they're in a tough spot these days. They weren't back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, everyone had this attitude that you could beat up on trailer residents with abandon. That's when Jai Foxworthy was selling books and TV shows on trailer trash, and America was all jumping on the trailer trash thing. And it emboldened city officials thinking, well, I can do whatever I want. You can't do anything to me. And then you had a string of Supreme Court decisions in 5 different states that upheld mobile home park owner rights. That kind of sobered people up. And then today you have the additional complication of if they do anything against poor people, you can file a HUD discrimination case on the city. And so they're not anywhere near as rough as they used to be. In the olden days, it didn't matter what you had going. They'd try and bluff you into shutting your park down or not using your vacant lots. And today we don't have that anymore. I mean, I've been in meetings back in the old days where I remember one, I brought in an attorney with me to the meeting, and the city administrator was banging his hand on the desk saying, look, you're never going to be able to use those vacant lots. Don't even ask me. You're just wasting your time. And I walked out of the meeting. I said to the attorney, the guy's nuts, right? He goes, yeah, he's absolutely freaking nuts. So we filed a lawsuit on him. And immediately when they got served the suit, the city attorney called and begged forgiveness, and everything got dropped. But in the old days, you had to really go after it to get any respect. Today's a lot different. The cities are much more cognizant of the problems they're going to have if they try and beat up on less affluent residents. So it's a lot different today.
Good to know. Okay. So that being said, it seems to be getting harder for landlords to evict tenants. I know I've had issues in the past, but now with COVID, it just seems near impossible. This is
Yeah,
a question that
that's
comes
right.
to me.
Well, you got these lockdowns. First thing you had the national moratorium, then you had the state moratoriums, then you had the CDC order, then you had the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac CARES Act deal, where if you had an agency loan, you couldn't evict them. I mean, the nation's going to have to figure out what the plan is, right? They're talking about another moratorium through the end of January as soon as the stimulus thing passes. But, I don't think you can legally burden property owners to provide housing for free. That's the government's job. That's called Section 8. Okay. And they're trying to pass Section 8 onto private landlords. I don't know where this legal thinking is coming from. There's been some gigantic lawsuits filed. None have progressed through the courts yet, but they're gonna. And at the end, it's a private taking. It's a public taking of private property. It's not supportable by law, and it's running out of juice. When this first came down with COVID, everyone was kind of this knee-jerk reacting, proactively trying to make it to the weekend. But at this point, how can you claim that you need to continue to have the moratorium on evictions? The people who lost jobs, they still had unemployment. And at this point, that unemployment is now eight months or more, and now they want to extend it further. I mean, if you can't retool in a year, what's the plan? Like, what do you do? I mean, if you were working at the restaurant and you got laid off, and clearly the restaurant industry is not coming back anytime soon, you might want to change careers. But if you won't, I read an article on they interviewed an actress in Hollywood. She's never actually worked, but she wants to be an actress, right? And she hadn't paid her rent since COVID hit. So she hasn't paid her rent since March. Her rent's $2,000 a month, right? So the reporter says, so what's the plan? And she goes, well, I'm not going to give up acting. Well, then she hasn't worked not one time since then, right? Wow. So that isn't going to work. That's your plan is, no, I'm not going to be realistic on the new post-COVID world. Well, then it's never going to work. But supporting people and letting them have a free ride month after month, it doesn't accomplish anything, because if they're not going to retool, I mean, it's just kicking the can down the road. I can't imagine they can take the moratoriums to go to a year would be through the end of March, and they're going to come close. They're going to be like 10 months in, but how much longer can you go? And that's what nobody really knows how this all plays out in the end. But what you're doing, everyone in the industry knows that the worst thing you can do to someone, the worst curse you can put on someone, is not push people to pay their rent every month, because they dig themselves in a hole they can never get out of. Yeah. And that's what the government's done now. So all those people who are behind, they're going to all end up on the streets, because that was the worst thing you could do. I mean, what you want to do with residents is some degree of tough love, where they got to pay the rent, so they always at least have shelter. But when you give them the option of not paying the rent, yet the rent is still due, that's the wackiest concept of all time.
Well said. Absolutely. And we have some issues with that now. And we did hear about the law, so we're hoping for the best. But because, mobile home parks, they still, from our end, they expect obviously law rent and we pay. But when you have tenants that are just flat out COVID kind of, it's being overused by an excuse, no doubt.
It is absolutely being overused. And the way the CDC order was enacted, where basically anyone just signs the form under perjury, but they don't care. There's no teeth in it. We've had plenty of people sign the forms that we know never lost their job, never did anything on the form, and they do it anyway. And the government does absolutely nothing to punish those who cheat on that. Wow. Right? It's just ridiculous.
Taking advantage. I guess anywhere it can be done, it's going to be done. That's the unfortunate.
That's correct.
Now back to parks on. Do you see a need to have a park manager in every park? We run.
Yes, you got to have a person in the park in every park. It will never work unless you have someone there.
Regardless of the size of the park.
Doesn't matter the size.
Good,
You've got to
good.
have, even if you had a 10 space park, you got to have somebody just to be your eyes and ears who lives there.
Mhm.
Because when things happen, they happen at sporadic moments, and you have no support mechanism if you don't have someone there who you can act as your eyes and ears. It's like, self-storage today, a lot of them manage these things on iPads on wheels, right? That's a lot of storage places. That's their like part of their employment is the iPad that roams around, and they have some guy in some central office that his thing triggers when there's motion detector, and with a motion detector, the iPad like chases after the person, like, what are you doing? You want to rent a locker? What are you doing? Right? We don't have that in mobile home parks because we got speed bumps and rough terrain, and we can't really do the iPad on wheels. So you got to have a human be your iPad on wheels, and you need someone who can call you and say, hey, the power just went out. The windstorm just blew through. You'll go nuts if you don't have that kind of real-time information.
Interesting. That's a new one. Okay. And we run into parks, the whole southeast where we're at, many parks that the office is some of the location. Some people kind of know about it. We just kind of mail checks in, money orders. And I just
It's
think this
tough.
is why the park looks the way it is. Nobody's there to hold anybody accountable.
Yeah, you can't get excellent customer service when there's no one there to be the customer service representative, right? That's impossible. If you went to the front desk of the hotel and no one answers the phone, there's nobody there. How does that work? It just doesn't work.
Well, absolutely. Now, parks of sense, that's something we hope to get into 2021 at some point. It's been a goal of ours. Do you see a lot of parks typically for sale throughout the nation?
I think what you're going to have in 2021, I think you're seeing escalation of the number of parks going up for sale, mainly because you've got, Biden apparently going to be president. And one of his big things was eliminating capital gains tax. So you have a lot of park owners who are rushing to try and sell before they eliminate capital gains tax.
Mhm.
Now, they're probably wasting their time on that theory if if the Republicans win just one seat in the Georgia runoffs, then it's very unlikely that the House and the Senate are going to agree to the end of capital gains tax, right? That's not going to be super popular with a lot of people, particularly real estate people who donate a lot to politics. So I don't think that will be enacted necessarily, but if the Republicans lose both runoff seats, it is on the table. So a lot of people are like, man, I'm going to sell now, because if I sell now, I can lock on capital gains compared to later. Now, the other way it's going to probably work out is you'll have a whole bunch of parks that'll be dumped on the market because of fear of capital gains tax. Then, of course, 4 years from now, you'll have a whole new regime, and they'll probably bring capital gains tax back. It's happened in American history. It's not like this has never happened before. And so where you would get stuck is if you happen to sell after they enacted the retraction of it before the new regime puts it back. Those are the people who get screwed.
Right. Okay. With that being said, all that is going on, would you say for new people, it's a good time to invest in parks, mobile homes?
Yeah, I think the problem is if you don't take action, sometime soon you'll run out of time, because all of the parks that we buy and that most people buy, you're buying from the old moms and pops
Mhm.
who are getting kind of up there in age. I mean, you had the greatest generation. When I first started out, all the parks I bought were greatest generation people, mostly World War II veterans.
Okay.
All right. So a World War II veteran would be someone who served in the war. You'd be born typically back in the 20s, right? Or even earlier. So if you're in the 20s, you're now 100. But back when I started up, you were in your 70s.
Right.
So that was my main forte. Then you transition to what's called the silent generation, which are the folks born between 1930 and 1945. But now time is marching on them, right? So if you're a 1930 person, well, now you're in your 90s, right? The 1945 people, they're in their 80s or at the most late 70s. And you fast forward another decade, they're all going to be dead. Well, those are the people who own all the parks. So if you don't do something soon, when those people all ultimately die, you won't be any good buys left, because you'll be buying from people who aren't from that era. And those are the people who are the easiest to work with, carrying paper, good pricing.
Mhm.
And then if you go one generation beyond that, that's not quite so good.
Absolutely. Very good. A lot of knowledge. I can sit here and listen to you all day, and I watch a lot of your YouTube videos, like I mentioned at the beginning. So a lot of information to know. What advice would you give to somebody new getting into investing, mobile home parks, mobile home?
Well, yeah, the biggest thing I think is you got to have both. You got to think like a person of action and act like a person of thought. Okay. Just jumping out there and buying a park without knowing what you're doing is going to lead to disaster. But if you overthink it and never do anything, it doesn't help you either. Right. So you got to do both. I mean, it doesn't work. I remember I used to have a bank officer and he was just obsessed with a Corvette, right? He wanted an old classic Corvette, like a 1960s Corvette. He learned everything about them, but his entire life, he never bought one, right? He'd go to every car show, every ad for sale. He'd always talk himself out of it, say, no, it's a little pricey. It's not perfect. It's got a little bit of rust. So what did he have to show for all the knowledge? Absolutely nothing, right? Never owned a Corvette his entire life, died, never had a Corvette. So, I mean, if you're into something, you kind of got to take the shot, but before you take the shot, you got to learn what you're doing. He had all the knowledge, but no action. Just as dangerous would be someone with money burning a hole in their pocket, want to buy a Corvette, run around, buy it when it's filled with rust, engine's blown, isn't even an original car, doesn't even have matching serial numbers. Then what the heck did you do? So you got to have both.
I say that a lot to my students is, educate yourself so much and take action. That's a whole new way you just put it there. That's very good. I'm gonna reuse that one there.
It's not my quote. I can't remember who said it once. It's a famous quote.
Absolutely. When you were getting started, what kept you motivated? What kept you going?
I'm a big goal setter. I like to do goals all the time. I'm always making lists, things I want to do, things I want to own, things of all type. And then I work backwards from that. So I'd say, here's what I want to do. Here's my quality of life, my target. This is what I want to do. And then what do I have to do to get there? That's how I work it. So basically, I'm always setting new goals for myself, new things I want to do. And that's what keeps me motivated is I'm an employee to myself. So I make these lists for myself and then I hire myself to go out and do them. And if myself doesn't get them done, I can't really fire myself, but I can feel like I'm not doing a very good job. So that's how it works.
You hold yourself accountable, I'm sure, to a pretty high standard.
Well, I do, but at the same time, I'm pretty reasonable on my goals, right? I try and, the key for people is you want to keep your living expense really, really low, but you want to have a good quality of life. Say some people, they don't get it. They're like, yeah, let's keep living expense low and live horribly. No, that's not a success story, right? But yet you don't want to have your burn rate of your living expense enormously high either, right? You want to find a happy medium because otherwise you're just freaking out constantly how to pay the bills. To invest, you want to be able to have a little more stress-free existence, a little more peace of mind, a little more patience. And so, one thing that my partner Dave and I have found is, living in a small town is freaking awesome. We love living in a small town. I don't know where you live, but we're huge small town advocates because you can have a really high quality of life at a really low price. It just gives you more flexibility to invest more and to be more patient in what you're doing. But a lot of people, if you figure out what you want to do in life, it's not most of it's not actually money intensive, right? Relationships with people, health, that's free stuff, right? And the money is just a tool to get what you want. So you just got to figure out how much money you need to get what you want, and then work backwards. How do you create the money? And you're in the end zone.
Very good. One last question before we go here. So, how important would you say coaches and mentors are?
Well, let's face it, all through your life, you're dealing with coaches and mentors, right? Whether it's your parents, people in school, that's how life goes. I look back at my business career because I've been on my own since I was 21. I started my first company when I was 21.
Wow.
Never worked for anybody, never got a paycheck, never had any security whatsoever. And all along the way, the only reason I'm alive today is because people would give me tips. Old guys would tell me, oh, no, you're doing it all wrong. This is how you do it, right? That's how it works. So if you can get tips that help you, then it's great. The only problem is if you get someone who isn't helping you, then cut that loose and try something new, right? Sometimes people get in a rut because they'll select a mentor. Let's say someone says, yeah, I want to be like the Kardashians or something. Well, that probably doesn't work for you long term. It's not working for them either, right? But if as long as people are helping guide the way and tell you what they did wrong in the past and how you can do better, then that's what life is. Life is nothing but coaching and mentoring. That's why, they've always had, respect your elders or whatever. The elders can give you tons of information.
Sure.
I would know diddly about the park business if I didn't have old park guys when I got into it telling me what I was doing right or wrong. All kinds of stuff. I never had a clue. You'd never have a clue. Like I one time was trying to decide if I should have a dumpster or polycart trash in a park. The old guy says, dude, that isn't how you do it. that isn't how you don't decide which is more expensive. He says, it's all about your roads. And I suddenly realized the guy's totally right. Those big dumpster trucks weigh as much as a locomotive. The polycart don't weigh anywhere near as heavy.
Mhm.
So the big trucks will destroy your roads. So if that guy had never told me that, I'd still be going, let's see, well, the dumpster's $10 a month less and doing $20,000 of road destruction.
Wow.
So yeah, life is nothing but coaching, mentoring. That's what life is about.
Learn from others that have already done what you're doing. Absolutely. Yeah,
Correct.
I'm a high believer of mentors, coaches, and you can do it yourself. And there's a lot of mistakes that you're going to make, or you can learn from other people who's already done it and can teach you
Right.
did not make the same
Yep.
mistakes. So what's
Correct.
next for Frank? What is your next step? What's your next big thing?
Well, the big thing for us is just running this portfolio that we've built, right? We have, 100 linear miles of roads, water, and sewer. We have about 60,000 residents, assuming about 3 folks per household. So we've kind of created the city of mobile home parks, and we're pretty much just running that. So, we'll add on parks over time. We'll also sell off parks over time, but that's pretty much the end of the movie on that. So that's kind of where I am. I can't go up a notch. I mean, right now we're rated 5th largest in the U.S. I think we're about to probably drop to 6th because of UMH, which is a public REIT who I think is going to beat us this year. But I don't have any desire to go to 4th, so it doesn't matter anymore.
Well, you're up there. You're one of the biggest, that's for sure. Okay. Frank, it has been a pleasure, sir. I can sit here and talk to you all day, learn from you. I know like I mentioned a couple times in this video here is, I listen to you a lot on YouTube. If anybody else wanted to learn from your education, how can they get a hold of this?
If you just go to our website, it's MHU for mobilehomeuniversity.com. You can't miss us. All my articles are on there. My podcasts are on there. Everything I ever did is on there. I mean, that's our hobby side. In other words, where our day job is, we own and operate all these parks, but we've been writing and speaking about it for about as long as we've been doing it. So it's all on there.
There you go. And I'll link on this video as well below the YouTube channel where they can find you. So email me directly. I'd be happy to respond to that as well. j@garciamhu.com. But Frank, it has been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.